Just pulling up some Dark Triad stuff.
All right. Well, it's been a little time, Jeremy. Just a
Yes.
little time since we've last gone together here. Um,
Yeah, indeed, it has been. Probably like over a
yeah,
week, I would say, maybe, which
yeah,
is rare
yeah.
for us.
So welcome everybody. It's Dr. Paul from Romantopedia and Men's Psychology, as well as my own Substack with Jeremy Fox from Psych Fox, and also Guy Psych on Twitter. And we
Yes,
we got a
thank
lot of
you.
people suddenly joining in, so that's great. A little bit of a late start. We're gonna hopefully go for about an hour, and
Yes, we are.
I have some references up here, some documents. I had sent you out a note earlier in the day, kind of pre-announcing this. So I'm glad that you kept your schedule clear for an hour here, talk to us. And I promised talking about natalism versus antinatalism. And Jeremy got me on that topic today. It's also been discussed, I think, recently by Rob Henderson. It was
Yep.
discussed a long time ago, like over a year ago at least, by Jordan Peterson. It was kind of a topic.
Hmm.
And we started with that, but then when we dug in a bit into the debates on the topic and how people argue about is it good to have children? Is it not good to have children?
Right.
Uh, I didn't find a ton of academic research on the topic. There have been a lot of debates about it, pretty fiery
Yeah.
debates, and for me, it was kind of more of a personal thing. I mean, I've had some friends who are anti-natalist, and I'll just kind of put my perspective right out there. I didn't understand where they were coming from at all.
Yeah.
um, Although, if you listen to debates on it, most notably, and I suppose recently, people talking about the person named David Benatar, who's a philosopher from South Africa, I believe,
Yes.
um, in
Yes.
debate with Jordan Peterson about his reasons for being anti-natal, and we could get a little bit into that, but it kind of led to a dead end for me and Jeremy, kind of previewing this as far as length, and it made me think a little more about the romantic lifespan, if you will, for men and women. Because a lot of this is personal. I have family members who've re-entered the dating pool and had a horrible time.
Hmm.
You know, decade or two or more, um, for me, since having to deal with that. And I found it difficult enough back in the day.
Hmm.
And Jeremy, you can attest to how is it today, and so can my family members telling me it's far worse even than I experienced as a male, being in the dating pool,
Hmm.
way way before any consideration of offspring. You know,
Hmm.
so kind of for me, us kind of riffing on this a little bit before getting on here, it made me think of a romantic lifespan, if you will, all the way from what does it feel like to be in dating or re-entering dating,
Hmm.
all the way up through should you have a baby if you
Yeah.
have the opportunity to. A lot of
Right.
people are grateful just for the opportunity to, let alone having a negative view.
Yes. I think this is a really good topic. It's very timely. So I actually worked with an antinatalist for a client, and with HIPAA laws, I can keep this very, very general. Um, so this particular client had a
Please do
very
so.
what?
Please do so. Keep it very general.
Oh, believe me, I am such a
Yeah,
HIPAA
yeah.
ethical stickler. It's unbelievable. So I'll make it this general. So this client was a male who had had a difficult life and seen things happen to family, and had just drawn this conclusion that it wasn't really worth that potential, like something happening to someone who's born, because they can't consent to being born. So the idea of consent is at the forefront, really, of antinatalism, and the idea that
Mm.
someone could say I wouldn't have chosen to be born. So I'd never really heard it put that way before. That that it's all about like you someone can't choose to be born or not, so you can't ask them because they're not born yet, and so it leaves you with the only ethical thing being no. And I think, well, so that is a very human 2020 whatever, because it wasn't this year that I had this person, but
Right. Right.
it's a very postmodern way of looking at things.
Yeah.
So it's very
And
much, yeah.
weirdly poly spiritual. You know,
Yeah, that's
like
a good,
reincarnation ish. Is there a soul out there that hasn't been given the free will to be forced,
yeah.
to be born and this sort of thing? It's like it's both atheist yet poly spiritual. I just coined that term, by the way.
No, I love that. So polyspiritual meaning it could span different spiritualities where it's kind of like a nebulous spirituality.
Yeah, it's a nebulous pick and choose, make your own spirituality out of
Yeah.
various working parts that includes a continuum of, I guess, souls
Yeah.
existing, because there would have to be a soul to exist in order
Yeah.
for it to be robbed of its free will to enter this universe.
Yeah.
It's kind of woo woo, and at the same time,
Yeah.
very obsessive sounding.
Yes.
Going into it today, preparing for this, I didn't like what I got into and what I saw. And I went to immediately to some friends, a couple, married couple, that I was friends with, a decade or so or more ago, and we've kind of not spent as much time together.
Mhm.
No HIPAA here, but
Mhm.
old friends, and their perspective. I think the man would have wanted kids, but was not aggressive about pursuing it, and the woman did not. And I think
Mhm.
that made it easier for them as a couple to kind of come to whatever kind of agreement they reached where they're just not going to have kids. And the woman did all
Sure.
the talking about why, because I was like, well, why would you not? I mean, I think he would have been a fantastic father, really fun, humorous,
Mhm.
um, action prone guy, smart. um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think she was just generally into the idea of being a mother and what it entails.
Sure.
But her she did all the talking, and her reasoning was mainly about the climate and the earth sucks, and it wasn't as much about like what Benatar argues, about life being bad generally. For her, it was like climate. The planet will die. Why would you bring a child, into the world if the planet's going to die? And I don't know how soon someday it'll die, maybe in a billion years, but it will at some point. I don't know when. It doesn't seem like it's going to be tomorrow or the next decade. Um, so I kind of didn't get where she was coming from with her reasoning. And as a psychiatrist, I won't belabor this point, but as a psychiatrist, I felt like there's some other reason other than that. Doesn't make sense to me. That's the reason. It seemed like kind of a shroud over, not to use, funeral imagery, but it was like a veil over the real reason, which probably has something to do with I just don't want to deal with the work
Yeah.
involved. Because there's mention of that. At that time, we had a child,
Yeah.
um, and now he's 10, so it gets personal there for me too. Because I think there's natalism versus antinatalism. I'm not like some activist for it, like some are, but
Yeah.
it is a good thing, and it's the most horrendous amount of work I've ever done in my life. It does my career doesn't even match the amount of work it is having a child, having a son, but it's pretty fantastic. Um, yeah, I will say this: he just won a regional geography B.
That's
It's really
awesome,
it
dude.
knows way more about geography than I do, like what an exclave is and knows everything about North Korea. For some reason, he's into North Korea, because it's so bizarre, I guess. But anyway, the point is, I can't imagine life without one,
Yeah.
and comparing that to what it was like before, I don't think I was that aggressively pursuing it before either, though.
Hmm.
It's easy
Yeah.
to not do so and just enjoy your life and let time pass and not think that much about it. But it kind of comes about naturally as you progress through your romantic lifespan, which is the grand topic of this talk. So what are your thoughts? You read this about this Benatar and his reasons, the focusing on the asymmetrical concept of his, and what he means
Yes.
by asymmetrical is there's like a grid, four square grid,
Yeah.
and on two corners there is, well, avoiding pain would be nice. That's good. That is a
Hmm.
good. Having pleasure is nice. That is a good.
Hmm.
Having pain is bad,
Right.
but having pleasure, these are the other corners. Having pleasure is not necessarily, or lacking pleasure is not necessarily bad. That's the asymmetry. Having
Yeah.
pain is always bad.
Yes.
Lacking pleasure isn't necessarily bad.
Unless,
Therefore,
yeah.
asymmetry tilts you toward don't bring a child into the world because it's assuming there will be pain. There will be pain. And Peterson talks about that a lot. Life isn't about finding happiness, it is full of pain, but it's
Yeah.
what it's for is full of meaning. And I kind of like that idea. I've never met a person who didn't have pain at some point.
Hmm.
All right, I'll shut up now.
No, I think
Let you riff.
that's a good foundation. So I would say that you're making a lot. Not you. I would say that antinatalists are making a lot of assumptions on principles that they probably would admit to. So here's the deal. So you have to think that that pain, any pain, equal to any pleasure, are essentially that pain trumps that. You have to think that there is something bad about having more pain in some degrees than pleasure, and that it isn't baked into something noble or worthwhile, that there's pain and then sterling moments of beauty and then pain. So you have to take away the romantic, and I mean that in the view of romanticizing life, and also maybe even looking at the romantic period of the vitality of life and it being a beautiful thing, how emotional it is, and the triumph of man's will in the face of the elements, right? You have to take away that view and say, look, that doesn't matter. There isn't something bigger that humanity is striving toward in an individual life. If that life feels pain, it's worth it to just say shelter it from that. So you also have to be completely atheistic and secular to think that way, because if you were Christian or any traditional religion, I'm not saying any religion, if you were a monotheistic religion, then you would say, well, so that person is going to go through life and then enter into an afterlife, and they have the potential to go to paradise. If you are in a Buddhist religion or Hindu, you could say, well, that soul is going to be born and it will go through it and either reach enlightenment on this cycle or it will go through another life after that. That soul will come to be. If I don't have it in my child, it might be somewhere else. So it goes against I would almost think every religion would have an answer for why birth is better, why it's better to have a kid than not. So antinatalism is a uniquely, in my opinion, sort of Western perspective that takes everything out of that view. It does not allow for the view that pain accentuates beauty. And that view is very foundational to most, I would say, of Western society. But now we've entered an era where the avoidance of pain has become its own virtue, which is a very, very dangerous virtue that acts as a solvent that actually dissolves the others. So if you try to
Oh,
avoid
wow. What do you
pain,
mean by that?
so what I mean is
That's very
avoidance.
vivid imagery there. It's a
Thank you.
solvent that dissolves. all others.
Well,
The
it
belief
kind of
that
came to me. So what I mean,
okay.
if you look at the Stoic virtues of wisdom and courage, both of those would say so. Courage is obviously boldness. So you have to say with courage, I mean, not just boldness; it's also boldness with reason. Like I'm not going to be foolhardy. That's bold for a reactive, impulsive reason. Courage is more I'm standing up for my country or my family for reasons that matter, and I'm doing it in spite of fear. So that says there's going to be pain, possibly. I may even die, but it's worth it to take a stand. So, temperance says maybe I pull back on pleasure now and I have some moderation, maybe for some other reasons. Maybe I don't need to be drunk when I go to work tomorrow, right? So it's against hedonism. It's more moderation. And so justice says I'm going to do something that matters. I'm going to have a moral compass, and sometimes that involves pain and punishment to an evildoer. Like you could just go down the list and say, if the avoidance of any pain at all is the goal, then you won't do anything. You won't move forward. You won't. So we have that in the dating world now. This kind of dovetails nicely with the dating question because online dating apps hit people with a lot of options. I saw a TikTok where a girl said, uh like it showed her looking shocked, and it was like my expression when a man threatens to go on a date with me when I matched him of my free will on a dating app. Now obviously it's sarcasm saying, oh, I matched this guy and I find him handsome, but I'm scared to go on a date. And there was people in the comment section saying, oh, I relate to this. It's like, well, so that's avoidance. And if you guys met at a coffee shop or you met in high school, that it wouldn't have mattered that you were anxious because you would have talked and gotten over it. You wouldn't have been able to avoid that same way. So we're looking at questioning everything. We're looking at avoiding everything now because we can. We're not faced by natural predators. We've got it kind of cushy apart from inflation. So in this neck
Mm,
of earth, that's kind of
yeah.
my view on it, as I think we can sit and ask these kind of questions. If you needed help on a farm and you needed, again, I go back to that agrarian culture, hunting gathering culture, like you would have been thinking, I don't need to bring someone to the world. You would have thought like, I want my line to continue. I have to have it. We're all going to die if it doesn't. I mean, there is no urgency and there's an avoidance now. And that's the fertility rate issue. That's a lot. It's, you know, looking at delaying adulthood, progressing adolescence, and Gen X basically coddling their kids to the point where it's like, well, it's okay to be a 30-year-old teenager. It's so cute. It's like, well, it's really not. And nobody thinks that unless you are indulging that kid, that adult at that point. Like, you're not, the rest of the world doesn't see it that way. Sorry.
Well, wow, man. I mean, you're starting to make me think it's like this Sisyphean, difficult problem to like if you can't even get off your app and out of your chair and onto a date. Why are we even talking about babies and natalism? That's like forget it. That's not even in your future if you can't even get started in dating and finding the right mate, the right person, which is incredibly difficult, to
So
begin with, you
I
know?
don't, yeah, I know. I think there's
I
room,
wonder how
there's,
old this Benatar is. I didn't investigate, his life story or how old he is. I've listened to debates. I haven't seen him visually, so I don't even know, but he sounds like an old philosopher guy, long
yeah.
out of the dating pool is what he sounds like. But
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean the person, okay, let's see. Oh, he's almost 60, and to be quite blunt, he actually looks rather youthful in this picture. It's very interesting.
okay.
Fascinating. So I mean, he's not, there are people who, so I'm going to introduce a term to the audience that they can then have in their minds in the coming days. Moral scrupulosity is a form of OCD, and I find it to be very common among people with OCD, and I actually think it's rather common more than we know. So, the moral scrupulosity voice says, don't ever do anything wrong. If something can be done wrong, it's the worst thing possible. I can't make a mistake or I'm evil. Like I'm going to be evil accidentally. And I almost find antinatalism to be a
Like a
sort of,
variant of that?
yeah, I would say it
Yeah.
goes along because I'm thinking of the person that I worked with, and and it
Yeah.
was like he had that flavor of scrupulosity of kind of like, well,
Okay.
yeah, and I
So
find that to be a very dangerous thing because it's a stultifying thing. It's moral perfectionism, and as we know,
ah,
perfectionism is very difficult because it stops you from doing
yes.
anything. And so when we get on here, I have to talk. I can't delay it. I can't sit and overthink what I'm going to say because that's going to be boring for an audience. That's why I love public speaking. Is
Yeah.
it's like there's a vitality to it. I have to get my ideas out. I'm not going to sit and worry about the last sentence and word and period. And so if you have to make decisions in life morally and no nothing like and you have perfectionism, there's going to be if you have scrupulosity, there's going to always be something you could think that you could do wrong accidentally or that it could go wrong. And it's a virus type way of thinking, like OCD tends to
Mm.
be. It infects the natural way that you would do things just moving forward with care. You don't want to have kids and wonder like, well, don't know what to do now. But you also don't want to think that the idea of continuing the species is unethical. There is a middle ground.
Well, okay, so compare this, let's say this person um, without going into the details,
Yeah, yeah.
to compare to the philosopher Benatar. I
Okay.
think I think what's happening is people will latch on to an academic or a public speaker like Benatar, who is obliged to be incredibly detailed and to use logic to argue morality, and it's his thing. It's his division of philosophy. It's kind of his career. It's his profession. It's what he does. So
Right.
he may or may not have personality traits, character traits that are scrupulous in nature. Maybe he does. Maybe that's what got him into it. But his task is to be detailed,
Yeah.
incredibly detailed in making an argument. But then if you
Yeah.
get a layperson, non-philosopher, non-academic, latch on to those ideas, who is a morally scrupulous person, then they found the ideas that justify their ongoing scrupulosity.
Yeah.
It's like finding a guru, so to speak. But the more
Yeah.
I think about this, I have all kinds of problems Benatar's view, in the sense that, I mean, if do you believe that we are a species, and do you believe in evolution? I mean, not only is it, we don't even have to talk about religion to kind of negate the argument that you're denying free will to a previously non-existent, if you're an atheist,
Yeah.
non-existent entity, person. If you don't believe in souls, then they don't have a soul and they don't have free will, theologically. Then you're not denying anything to anyone. And are you kind of the master of evolution? Are you God, so to speak, where you can decide how the species ought to evolve? Because where my mind went, getting deeper and deeper into this Benatar and the debates, with him, I got into, well, extend it, to the entire species, and the species ends. So are you pro the end of Homo sapiens?
I think they would
I
say
mean,
yes. I really think they
okay,
would. I think the
okay.
idea is that pain needs to be exterminated from the universe, which to me is one of the most bizarre ideas, but it's logically consistent. I mean, I have to say, we've so humanity has decided that pain, the elimination of pain, is paramount. And so Freud talks about the pleasure principle, and that's the id. It's like what I want right now. And so what's bizarre about that is you can look at this as a very perverted combination of, and I'm glad I'm saying it's alive, this can be time stamped. I wonder if it's been investigated. If you think about this, the id, and Freud might have said, I haven't read all his stuff. if the id wants pleasure right now above all else, and the thanatos drive craves destruction, and so antinatalism is what happens when that thanatos death drive and the id combine, basically to say, the I want pleasure but I don't want pain, and so the end go, the telos, needs to be eliminating all pain forever, and that means all life. And it's like, wait a minute, that's like a runaway AI. That's like some Terminator stuff where it's saying logically the only way pain
Ah,
cannot exist is therefore to eliminate humanity. So
yeah.
I mean, I
And
love
those
indoor
tuning in
plumbing.
are saying that too. Geraldine, thank you for being here. Michael,
Yes, it is machine
Angela,
thinking. Yeah.
yeah, she says machine thinking there. Yeah, yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that I mean that seems to me to run counter to to logic itself. It is a well, I go back to our basic principles talking about the instincts that we are born with and discover their use over the lifetime. How, from both a Freudian and a Darwinian sense, they have two purposes: survive long enough to reproduce.
Yes.
That's their agenda. They're built into us to do so. We can
Yes.
negate and crush our own instincts and tamp them down, and to our great peril. Building up. Freud would call it a force or a pressure to suppress super ego suppression of the id, if you want to go all Freudian on it. And you can only do that for so long before you eventually are going to act out or explode, or it's going to come out in other ways in your health in some way, to squelch your instincts. So, you were talking postmodernism. This feels like a postmodernist thing, this
Yeah.
anti-natalism thing, that is from a perspective that we aren't biological creatures. Biology, I'm paraphrasing, biology doesn't really exist. We can just make up our own reality. We can make up our own identity. We're a blank slate. There's not forces of evolution at work within us that lead to instincts, and the drives of the instincts are always twofold: survive and reproduce, survive long enough to reproduce. The way that plays out in my view, in my works on human courtship, and borrowing some from evolutionary psychology,
Hmm.
um, I make the point that we can't escape those two drives. And the way the survival drive plays out in the modern world is in the form of career aspirations, or at least money, paying our way as we go through life. That's the survival aspect. We're no longer running around with clubs waging war. At
Right.
least we're not doing it with clubs. um,
Sure.
and we're not doing it constantly all the time, perhaps in the way that it was 50, 100,000 years ago. But the way it now plays out is in financial striving and career striving. Staying alive means, um, you're able to pay your rent and survive and buy food, at least. And if you extend that, it's probably a necessity. We could get into males and females and male and female instincts here. They go down the rabbit hole with that, but you need to have money, at least, to pay for food and shelter for yourself. But then from there, it's like Maslow's pyramid. From there, for you to date, to find romance, to find love, to pair bond, and mate with somebody, you probably need to have money for that too. Although
Uh-huh.
some may argue in the I have a story about a person I know who went on a Tinder date. And I'm sorry I laugh, but the way this is a male, the way he tells the story, it's just almost it's sad and comical. He said he goes
Okay.
on a date, and the woman he was on a date with expected him to pick her up, take her back home after going to dinner. And when they go to dinner, she pays attention to every other male but him and completely ignores him through the dinner. expects him to pay at the end of being treated that way, and then he he does pay for the whole dinner during which he was ignored, but then he's like, "Look, I gotta go. This is the end of the date. Good luck." And she was angry at him for not driving her home from there. And he thought nothing of it until like a couple weeks later, he was banned from Tinder for rudely treating the woman by not driving her home after she utterly ignored him during a dinner he paid for. Anyway, my point with all that is, what is my point?
I have a lot to say
Oh,
on that.
things cost money,
Yeah.
and
Well,
dating and romancing and just having the spare time to think about who's the right person for you costs money. To be able to have that spare time and then to go socialize costs money. So the survival variable, survive and reproduce, the survival variable has to do with generating income and having a career, probably before, have it solidly in place, or you're on your way to it being solid, probably before you even think about finding the right mate for yourself, and before you even think about children. Then back to natalism we go.
well, let's talk about that. I mean, so look, I would say that, man, I'm going to go white hot nuclear here, and I don't. This is not career ending. Don't
Wait,
worry. You
stop,
don't.
don't press the button.
No. So here's the problem. So no, this is not. I'm bearing the lead. I'm being a PT Barnum over here. So look, women are really good at sisterhood typically. Now, I've met women who were treated awfully by other women generally, and there were reasons for that. But and there's the harem effect where I'm making there's probably that's probably the term, but like women could all share a high status guy and have a child by him. Men can't do that. They need paternity of women, and they can't share that with other men. Men are more competitive, therefore. So, and this is not sociology; it's a fact. So, when you look at the ways that in the past men had smoking rooms and they had this sort of they were still competitive. I'm sure they were cutthroat, but men had friendships and they had community and they had accountability and they had mentorship. So you can't really have men without mentorship. I'll just say that. Somebody's probably already said that before, but I think it's a cute phrase that I just thought of. So you really can't have a man without mentorship. Masculinity is forged. We don't really care about that now. You and I do, and a lot of the male speakers out there do. But you've got some of the gurus, I'm not going to name names, probably don't care about that. But essentially, with online dating, you have amazing levels of masculine thinking of let's systematize dating, let's gamify it, let's make it a horror show for money. And they don't care that they're doing that to primarily men. Like, I don't know if women, I mean, women police each other and make fun of what each other wears, and they're really trying to impress each other in intragender uh, settings. Like, oh my God, can you believe what she wore? So women treat each other terribly. I know that. But I will say, men really not single-handedly, but they created these apps and unleashed absolute hell on their brothers in ways like that story you shared. They need to stop doing that a while. If you can make $1 billion sending Earth to hell and fertility to hell, you need to take a step back and ask if you should, because I promise you there are other business opportunities with your brain that you could do besides that. So I don't have a lot of patience for the. I think that the creation of online dating like that was first it was not that bad because you could basically match and date and message people as you wanted. Then it got gamified where they assigned you a score based on your perceived attractiveness, and then you were gate kept to where men were always knocked down lower. I mean, it's evil when you look at the science of it. And so basically,
Yeah.
that's what's happening to guys. And so the way to fight that system is to say, look, I'm going to have my best pictures out there. I'm going to not swipe every profile. I'm going to be very picky. I'm going to maybe get a matchmaker. I'm going to maybe go to church. Like there's a lot. I'm not. I'm not going to get derailed by this. It was a great story. It fired me up, but we need to be looking at what has enabled this because men will do so much to stab each other back for female approval, and that is what has accelerated I think, massive fertility decline. Uh, like just this. No, let's take a minute and let's date sensibly and not have the view that any if you're not the guy doing that that will put up with being treated poorly at the restaurant and not and driving her home, someone else will. Like Tinder should never done that. They never should have
Mm.
banned for that. That's stupid. And that's enabling a narcissist to continue gaming a system. And so, but do they care? Like that's the question. Somebody
No, they
has
don't.
to.
I mean, I told you once, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I met with some VPs from a big company, the only game in town back then, about some personality matching algorithms I had developed that hold water.
Yeah.
They're worthwhile. And they work. They're accurate.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were like, nah, nah, don't care. Glad to meet with you, but we are just making a giant warehouse. We
Yeah.
just want as many people to pay to be in that warehouse as possible. And whatever they do
Bingo.
in the warehouse, we don't really care, so long
Bingo.
as they stay in the warehouse. We don't actively try to prevent them from finding love and getting out of the
But
warehouse,
you
but
don't help them.
we would like them to stay in the warehouse.
Yeah. What
And I
that
would assume that since then, the algorithms and the sophistication of gamification has now found ways to lock you in the warehouse where you
so
keep paying to be there.
well,
Yeah.
so I want to say something about that really quick. So here's the deal with that. So there's a certain app that gatekeeps. It figures out who's attractive, and it will make you not be able to message them. You'll have to send a flower first. So I won't name the app. People will know if they hear this. And there's one. I mean, it's like, well, why? Tinder in 2015 wasn't like that. I know. And the thing is, you're committed. So here's the real problem. Okay, I'm going to lay this out here. I don't know if I've talked about this before. I've been saying it a lot lately, though. I've been saying it on Twitter. I've been saying on X. I mean, sorry, oh God, X. So that was before it wasn't the only game in town. So basically,
Yeah.
when in my generation and yours, the idea that you meet someone in high school or college, or even that you flirt with someone and get their number in public, was just normal. And so now I think high school, college are still safe, but there's this phrase of like Facebook's not a dating app, or blank is not a dating app. Any app that's not a dating app, people can say like, well, don't hit on someone on that. That's creepy. Well, men and women used to meet anywhere. They could meet the DMV. I mean, go watch a romantic movie. They meet places that is it's a meet cute. They meet somewhere, and it's like, oh, there's a spark. They don't just meet on apps, but there's a view that Gen Z has of basically it's harassment to hit on a woman ever. Full stop, because you're invading her privacy or space. Okay, well, so that's ridiculous. That's not sustainable. I'm sorry. So if you don't want to be hit on, fine. I get that. Don't date. Wear the giant headphones that everyone wears now that don't look great on everyone, by the way. You should figure out if you look good in them before you put them on. A friend should tell you. But you see this, it's like the privacy. So the idea that it's creepy to meet in public is out there. I'm not making this up. There was an article about it called
Wow.
like
That
where
I actually think the reverse. Yeah.
okay,
Even though I've been around for a long time, I think
okay,
the reverse. I love romantic comedies. I always have. There's a finite number of them, believe it or not. There's something like 219 total romantic comedies. The first one was in 1924, and it was called Girl Shy,
okay.
and it was
Very
a
cool.
silent film. So we've just now this year hit 100 years of romantic comedies, and
Amazing.
I think that's rather interesting. There's a finite number of them, and what makes them work and why they feel good and why they can be popular. I haven't seen a
Yeah.
good one in a number of years. So something happened in the culture, but the idea of a meet cute, it seems sugary sweet and maybe unrealistic to some, and yet those who have dated long enough and broadly enough and thoughtfully enough could probably attest to it being something real that can happen to you and has happened to you and has happened to me before, several times, many times maybe. Um, it's a real thing. So meet cute isn't a fake, false,
No. What did you say has happened?
concept.
Yeah. What did
That
you say has
well,
happened several times?
me having profound connections
Yes.
to people,
Yes.
which maybe didn't last or were brief or were just a moment or just that night, or lasted a few years, but they were real and they were not just sugary sweet falsities. They're real and they don't happen electronically, in my view. It can't possibly happen
Yeah.
even over a Zoom call or even
Right.
over a, a video discussion like we're having now. That kind of spark that you're talking about has to happen in person. And this is one of the things Aristotle, believe it or not, recognized that friendship and really profound friendship, which is a part of courtship, the
Yes, it
middle
is.
part, can only happen in person.
Yeah.
That and you call it quality time. It used to call it quality time. So I
Yeah.
actually think it's creepy in a way, in my
Mhm.
view, for there to be a spark online as
Yeah.
opposed to in person. In person is where the magic happens
Yeah.
and where the
Well, and
spark happens.
online, it's either a function of projection of
Or
saying,
You're buying humans on Amazon.
yeah, yeah.
Amazon style human buying.
Well,
I
so
probably shouldn't
again,
say that. um,
no, I get
I
what
mean,
you
it's
mean.
you're shopping for a
Yeah.
date. You're on
Well,
Amazon.
it's a
Yeah.
stack of cards. I mean, there's a lawsuit over online dating being addictive because it has a playing card mechanic where the profiles look like cards and you swipe. That was a key component.
Oh.
I think
Oh,
months ago we
yeah.
talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so this article by Pedro Gonzalez from January 31st is piping hot on Substack. Where have all the cowboys gone? It's about that. It's about the loss of in-person flirting because what happened was this dude wrote a letter, a flirty note to a girl at a mostly male event at a hackathon. And that's where like hackers go to talk about technology and things like that.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so it got shared and basically mocked. And so the only woman at hacker event receives an anonymous note. Okay. So she didn't like it. Or no, the woman's friend shared it. And so without getting too far into that, I think what ends up happening is people get humiliated online. Uh, let's see. It's and then they sit and they so the online panopticon of sit and titter and laugh and giggle at someone's attempt at courtship because that's what's happening. So we talk about courtship. We use that word a lot. I mean, you've got romantic dynamics, human courtship. So essentially, what's happening in courtship now is anything that deviates, anything someone doesn't like, they can blast out and make fun of along the courtship process, and they can and get away with it with some social approval from their peers. Now, if you take that away and you say, "Man, that's really weird and mean that you're making fun of that person," that would put a governor on it, like a car. It would make it not be able to go above a certain amount of speed, and we could stop this. But the idea that anyone's fair game and you can just make fun of them is where we are now to an extent. Especially if it's a
Mm.
guy trying to get a date, you can make fun of it. So you have two paths forward. You can decide not to give a bleep, which I think is probably a good one, a good path, as long as you're not being unethical. Or
Yeah.
you can take the route that you're told and you're bashed back into, like whack a mole, of get online, have a rigged game some dude made 10 years ago who's off living in the Bahamas off of the apps, like, like money that it's making now. Oh, I mean, you can do that's what you're left with. There's not, or try to meet someone in high school and college. And if they're not a good match, don't think, oh, I'm never gonna meet someone later. But essentially, I don't want to leave people without hope. I think you just have to know what's going on. You have to meet the kind of person character wise who's not going to take a note that you wrote and make fun of it. Like you don't want to date a mean girl. And you don't if you're a girl, you don't want to date a guy who views you as disposable. You don't want to do that no matter what either way. But it's like no one wants to be the project on Twitter that's getting reviewed with a fine-tuned fork and glasses. Like and that happens. I don't think the guy's identity was leaked, thank God. But imagine that you just shot your shot and it's like, oh, I'm going to put this on Twitter and say, hee, that's kind of funny. Well, how do you meet people? Do you sit back and have somebody ask your number? Do you have to take the risk of failing? Men don't need to be mocked for taking the risk of
Yeah.
asking out, because that's
Mhm.
what is going to keep this thing going. And about 10 years from now, we're either going to have realized that, or it's going to be worse, markedly, horrifically. So we need to
That
buckle
almost
in and
feels
be,
like, I've seen all of this happen, like watching a train wreck slowly um, in the culture, the whole online dating world and how dating works for people. I've watched for 20, 25 years, and it it seemed to me that the that everyone has taken on the strange and formerly esoteric uh, burdens of fame and
yeah,
famous people. In other words, the person I was talking to about who went on a Tinder date, and the girl ignored him, the woman ignored him, and he didn't give her a ride home. Then she reports him to Tinder for being rude, for not giving her a ride home.
right.
Um, that whole thing caused him to eventually be like, that plus the former, special movement that occurred for a number of years where males could get really they could just be walking down the street and they get in
Yeah.
trouble for walking down the street. And by the way, there's an interesting article about Catherine Bissett and
Hmm.
she's come out with her opinions about that whole movement, what she thinks of it. That males can be bad, but so can females, which kind of gets us into the topic of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism
Yes.
that we were gonna address.
We can
But
throw that in for sure.
let me just say about this this guy kind of quit dating, and he kind of feels like it's gonna be permanent, and he's in his 40s, and he's kind of like, just too much effort and too much risk. Like it's risky to date. It's just too risky to just date, to approach somebody or try to find another mate. Um, and that's sad because it's these are not famous people. They don't have the same risks that famous celebrities must have, where they can't be seen because the paparazzi might be around the corner. They got to be careful who they associate with because somebody might see it. Maybe they have to have agreements, PR, non-disclosure agreements, just to date people. I've heard of that. And now that the dangers, the strange esoteric dangers of the famous now belong to all people, which basically you can't really freely date and enjoy not just privacy for yourself, but the magic is the intimacy. The magic is in the intimacy. It's something shared between just you and one other person on the planet and nobody else. That's part of the magic, and that's
Yeah.
partly why the magic is gone.
Well,
And the other thing I wanna
absolutely.
say is the whole world has become a high school.
Bingo.
It all feels the whole world feels like it's become a giant high school.
Yes.
Because when you're talking about, spreading the ha-ha, laughter
Yeah.
about a guy, trying to make an overture
Yes.
toward a woman that he liked, and then
Yeah.
getting publicly shamed and embarrassed for it. I mean, that was high school stuff. That happened to me. It happened to a lot of men that I knew in high school, where if you passed a love note, they used to be called,
Yeah.
to a girl you liked, I must have been between 10 and 14 when I
Hmm.
did that, uh, girl named Julie, and suddenly that note that I sent to Julie got into the hands of the biggest female narcissist in the whole school, who then
Dang
read
it.
the note aloud on the school bus.
Dang it,
and it
man.
was just crushing. It was just a crushing, horribly embarrassing feeling, um,
That's a boo moment.
where you just, like, shrink down like Ant-Man in size, you just wanna hide, and you're stuck on the school bus, and the mean girl is reading the love note. So, apparently, the whole world's become a high school.
Well, yeah, it has. That's a brilliant metaphor for it. I think that that could be even a good article title or something good for us to call this uh broadcast when we chop it up or something. I mean, so to dovetail it way back, which masterfully segued here, I think what was interesting to me about the antinatalist article, which was really well titled "What's Up with Antinatalists," um, is the association, like the positive correlation between depression and antinatalism. So if you think life is essentially terrible and not worth living, you might think it's not good to transmit it, right? What's very interesting
Right.
is psychopathy and Machiavellianism were so strongly correlated with antinatalism. Now, I think that's fascinating because Machiavellianism is essentially just the belief that the end justifies the means and behavior to do so, behavior to get your goals met and whatever your needs are at the expense of anything, willing to do anything. Psychopathy is callousness, lack of empathy, and uncaring. So,
Isn't there a
um,
sadist side to it as well, to
yes,
psychopathy? Like, a difference between just generic narcissism, if we could call it that, somebody that wants something out of someone else, somebody looking for the terminology they tend to use lately is supply. They're looking for
yeah,
supply from
yeah,
someone else, someone to pay for the meal, somebody to be around, be their flying monkey, as they say, be their little follower, be their pseudo friend, be their
right,
willing ear, shoulder to lean on, person to help them move, person to play tennis with them, whatever it may
yeah.
be. You're using other people, but you're using them for something that person has that
Oh,
you
yeah,
want to employ in your own life. Whereas
right.
the psychopath or psychopathy carries with it some amount of sadism, the enjoyment of the pain of others.
Well, what's interesting about that is so psychopathy is impulsivity, callousness, lack of remorse or empathy. Um, it's there's actually so there's the triad of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So with Machiavelli, narcissism, everybody typically knows it's grandiosity, it's inflated self-importance, need for admiration. Okay, Machiavellianism is a cynical view of human nature, focused on self-interest and personal gain. Okay, at the expense of ethics. So essentially, those are the three things. Now, here's what's interesting:
Yeah.
sadism was added as the fourth to make a dark tetrad, and
Right.
sadism is essentially that desire to it's pleasure in deriving, excuse me, deriving pleasure from inflicting pain, suffer, or humiliation on others. So narcissism is less, as a construct, measurably, is less correlated than psychopathy and Machiavellianism. Those two together are found 40 to 60. The R is 40 to 60 correlation strength. So take that for what it's very interesting. Um,
Yeah.
so,
I
which
mean, are
makes
we
sense.
talking about evil? Are we talking about gradations of evil? I mean, and evil not in a theologic sense, but in some sort of character analysis
Mm.
sense. I mean, these are gradations of evil or flavors of evil. It almost
I mean,
sounds like how to construct a villain.
yeah, I
It's like,
think, I,
dial up the Machiavellianism in the villain, dial down the
yeah,
psychopathy, and now you
sure.
have, you know, this unique evil character in a film.
I mean,
Like
you
if you're a
could,
screenwriter,
yeah, I
sounds
think
like you're
it's,
designing a villain with
yeah.
these things.
I mean, I would be interested in seeing what um, the original studiers of this did. Jones and Paulus wrote a lot about this. I mean, and they were sort of the ones I remember hearing about them in 2013 is really when a lot of this exploded. So I mean, you, you
I
can
mean, I'm
look at it and
using
say,
ordinary person language
Yeah.
to, to reach, the people listening here,
Yeah.
um,
Which I like that.
by saying it's being villainous.
Yes.
So
So
then if Machiavellianism, my understanding of Machiavelli is he was actually trying to do some kind of good in the world by
yeah.
saying the way people behave is the way they behave. You might as well learn how they behave and find a way to be a leader, and these would be the ways that a leader can effectively lead. And you can't
Right.
lead by just being a nice guy
Yes.
to
Well,
everybody. You're going to get overthrown
sure.
at
No,
some
I
point.
think
That's what he was trying to do as a philosopher
yeah,
and
making
a
the
writer.
prince. Yes.
But Machiavellianism within psychology is something different
Right.
from a study of the philosopher.
Yeah.
It's somebody out to climb the ladder of success on your back.
Yes. The ends justify the means. Yeah, it's from Delroy Powless and Kevin Williams in 2002 first coined it. And so I remember that there was a trajectory going up there of people's knowledge of those terms. I mean, is it the way to construct a villain? I think that's a really good question. I think so. I would say if you really are interested like I was in going deeper down the rabbit hole and you want to limit it to one book, check
Yeah.
out The Science of Evil by Simon Baron Cohen, Borat's cousin. So Sasha Baron Cohen's cousin. And so
Oh, I didn't know he
si-
wrote about evil. I thought he was purely the autism researcher.
no, it's very
Huh.
interesting.
Wow. Simon Baron
That's
Cohen.
yes. So
Hypermasculine theory of autism.
yes, right.
Yeah.
Well, you nailed it. So The Science of Evil, I mean, it's a very sensationalist title. And if you look at it, it goes over the 0 degrees of empathy, he calls it, of different disorders. And so, and I want to be very, very sensitive here because you mentioned something that's going to come up. So autism, and I'll be very clear here when I say this, I'm speaking clinically. People with autism, depending on their level of it, often do not experience visceral empathy. However, they do not have sadism or psychopathy baked in. So they might not understand empathically what's going on, and they often struggle with social situations, but they don't have the desire to exploit and the desire to
Yes.
harm that often accompanies psychopathy. And so,
So
borderline
they
personality
can have
disorder.
regret. So
Yeah,
they have regret when
yes,
they're misinterpreted or they miss the social cue. They're very
absolutely.
sorry about that. Yeah. So
Yes,
and we're not talking
yes.
about Elon here. Is that what you were we're not talking about Elon.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm
Okay.
saying,
Okay.
yeah, we're not
Yeah.
dealing with we're dealing with what happens when you take away empathy on a visceral level of, oh, I feel that, or I don't want to do like I the ability to have so theory of mind, mentalization too. You could get into all of
Yeah.
this. So what's interesting is psychopaths often have very good cold empathy or mentalization, the ability to predict how someone will feel. They just don't feel it and really have that part of the brain lights up that's as if you were feeling it. Like the preorbital frontal cortex is not, excuse me, reverse the orbitofrontal cortex is not as active. I believe that's the part in uh, people who are high in psychopathy. There's some level of biological element to this uh, that that is at least measurable. So yeah, the OFC, orbitofrontal cortex, is less active in people who test low in empathy. Typically, it's very fascinating. That dysfunction is linked to lower empathy. So, I mean, I'm not going to get all. So I'm not going to be fatalistic and say, well, you're either born
Yeah.
that way or not. I think you practice that. Someone like um, Charles Manson, like he was made. He was a
Yeah,
product of
or
extreme.
Dahmer.
Right.
Weren't there more than, one, serial killer whose brain they either scanned or biopsied, or maybe didn't biopsy, or maybe they did autopsy, but there was missing orbitofrontal cortex. There was like an anatomical aberration. In fact,
Yes.
isn't there a scientist who studies the radiology of psychopathy, and he did a he did an MRI to himself, and he found that he's got the he's got the traits of psychopathy, but he's applied it to being a researcher. He was kind of disturbed
Uh-huh.
by finding out he has the brain of a psychopath,
Yes.
structurally at least. I forget the name. But anyway, that comes up.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
so
uh,
natalism. Let's not lose our listeners here. We started by talking about natalism versus antinatalism, meaning is it good to bring children into the world?
James Fallon is who
And
you're talking about, but yes.
what's his name?
James
Jeff Fallon.
Fallon, he wrote The Psychopath Inside. I have that book and didn't
Yes,
finish
yes,
it.
yes,
Yeah. It's a
yes,
good one. I
yes.
recommend it. I
That,
recommend any yeah.
that guy was interesting in the news a couple years ago. His research got a lot
Yeah.
of traction. But if we're talking about natalism versus antinatalism, then the research study that's been talked about this past week by Rob Henderson
Yeah.
was we came up with the findings that those who have the antinatalist perspective are very, very high
Yes.
in the correlation coefficient with psychopathy was
Yes.
0.62, 0.69, something like that,
Yeah, it's
like a
point
high
six two. I'm looking
correlation.
at it. Yep,
And
absolutely.
then narcissism was somewhat somewhat correlated,
0.29. Yeah,
and which is a
definitely not.
correlation. It's not 0, it's not 0.01.
It is a
And then
non-zero
Machiavellianism,
correlation. Yeah, Machiavellianism's point forty
point
nine, so almost five.
so
Yeah, point.
so point 0.5. So
Yeah.
Machiavellianism and psychopathy mean callousness,
Yep.
at least. I don't know
Yep.
about sadism, but callousness and self-concern and
Yeah.
getting ahead, climbing the backs of others on the ladder of success is the real driving, well, we can't say it's the real driving force, but it's strongly correlated,
Yeah.
which goes back to my experience of this couple that I was friends with long ago who were anti-natalist, at least the woman was. I don't really know
Yeah.
what the man felt. He just kind of went along with the narrative of it. Makes me wonder how how high scoring
Yeah.
was at least this woman, and probably the man too to some degree as a follower of her philosophy, being against having children, strongly correlated with the dark triad traits.
Well, I mean,
2 of the 3, at least 2 of the 3.
yeah. How much was the woman
Machiavellianism and
antinatalist, you're
psychopathy.
wondering?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
excuse me, how much was she psychopathic or
Machiavellian.
Machiavellian?
Yeah.
I mean, so
I
it
wondered
also
when she said, "Oh, it's all about the climate. The climate's bad. The earth will end. Why would we bring a child into the world?"
I would say
And I
there's
wondered,
a
"Wait a minute. No, there's
yeah.
something else
Well, and
underneath."
of course that can be a smokescreen. It's tough because people can notoriously lie about things. There was some real fear mongering a few years ago about that, and some people took it seriously, very seriously, I think. And there are people who just have the worldview that it's a net negative to have children. Like they don't think that it's a positive, and it doesn't mean anything to them. I mean, I've seen that. I've heard of that. I've encountered people like that in my dating world. I've encountered plenty of women who did not think that motherhood was for them or that it was a worthwhile investment. And so I think and of course there's different reasons for that. A lot of them it's not straight up I don't think it's good. I think it's an evil. Um for some people they can't get around the idea that pain can exist, and they don't have a religious tether or a stoic, and I mean that in the philosophy, not the concealing emotion. They don't have a belief in a virtue that makes the struggle of life worth it. So if you don't have that, it does seem very toilful. It seems like so much gnashing of teeth and wailing that isn't really worth it when there's millions who exist or billions. You hear the similar refrains among a lot of people who are antinatalist that there's enough people, there's a lot of pain and suffering. And then the climate stuff, like it's bad for the environment. I think what Rob said about it being used as a smokescreen to encourage others not to have kids when you want to have them is
Yeah.
actually a very interesting idea. I would lean toward that being the case for a lot of people, just because I think, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, he's right. I mean, everybody's right in their
Yeah,
own way about
how
this.
about that?
He's right in the sense that if somebody is a powerful media figure and they're promoting, antinatalism,
Yeah,
yes, perhaps they have a wonderful marriage and relationship and they're going to be having 6 children eventually. Yeah, I could see that if the person is a public speaker, a public intellectual, or somebody with power to get ideas out into the world, I could see that. But the individual couples or
yeah.
individuals who are anti-natalist in their lifestyle and are not heading down that path, that's different from just promoting an idea to conceal their secret uh, Freudian and Darwinian drive to do what the species has always done, which is to be fruitful and multiply if
Yeah,
possible. And the more you are able to, the more your genes will spread in the future, which is the prerogative of your instincts. Which is the prime directive of your instincts.
right,
I mean, these
right.
these people are all just talking about instincts.
Yeah.
So I don't I still don't get my friends, and I almost wonder if this term antinatalist or natalist, they sound like neologistic constructs. Somebody just made them up recently, is what they feel like. It wouldn't be something debated 40 years ago or 50 years ago, regardless of our sociology. It wouldn't be something debated 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
It's what we do as a species. So I almost wonder if the whole thing is just a cover for like a justification of where a large segment of society is in their lives at this time.
Oh, a
Because
post hoc. Go ahead. I
yeah,
like where you're
post hoc,
going.
ad post hoc rationalization, rationalization of their ability, what the way their life is going to play out based on what they've done so far and how old they are. I wonder if that's what's going on. Do you remember the term, another neologistic term from it's gone, I guess now, but it was hot for a year, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Sapiosexual. You're sexually attracted to somebody's brain,
Yeah, I
like
remember
somebody
that.
who's an intellectual, right?
Oh, I
You're a
remember that.
sapiosexual if you're
Yep.
attracted to somebody's intellect, right? You just
100% do I
are
remember
hot
that.
for
Yeah.
their intellect, right? Now that word's gone.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
feels like that. It seems like a neologistic, made up sociologic term that we can argue. And I'm wondering, why are we even arguing about it? Why are people arguing about the concept? It's always been that way for our species. And if you're anti this new word, um, in a way, aren't you pro suicide of the species?
Well, yeah, you are, but I
Doesn't that
mean,
get us into the moral debate over suicide?
well, think about this. I mean, it's kind of like conscientious moral objectors who say pacifism is the way always, and somebody else has to say that a war is necessary if it's like a really legitimate war. I mean, it's basically, I know what my moral is, and that's to totally abstain from procreation. It's like, well, aren't you saying that means extinction? Well, that's if other people listen to me. I don't know what they would say on a
Well, if they're
scale.
not an activist about it and they're saying, "Hey, I see this rationale."
Yeah.
Somebody who hasn't had children, I think it'd be most justified in somebody who has had a child, because now they
Okay.
know what that's like, and they can then
Okay.
say, "Wow, I know what I can handle. I know what's too much for me to handle or
Yeah.
us to handle, depending if there's
Right.
a marriage involved. And I now decide I'm going to do the most logical, responsible thing, which is not to have more. I
Yeah.
could understand that. But somebody who's never had them can't really know what it would be like, really, because they haven't had them. They could
No.
have vicarious experiences from their siblings or other family members or their own parents, perhaps,
Sure.
and then make a rational decision. Yeah, that's too much for me to handle. So I'm not going to on purpose. But that's a personal decision. If you become an activist on it or a public speaker on it, then aren't you promoting suicide of the species ultimately?
Well, so I think, and
Like
this is
all
just
the Elon stuff years I'm sorry to interrupt, but all
no,
the
go
Elon
for it.
stuff years ago when he was talking about the most important issue is people need to procreate, I was like, "What? That's kinda new." I thought we've always been afraid of the massive increase in the exponential increase in world population going to reach a boiling point where a lot of people are going to die due to war or starvation because the population is shooting up so much. But then he comes out and says that years ago that that's the biggest issue of our species is will we go on if we've declined in birth rate to less than that crucial number of 1 point something 1.6 births per female. It needs to be if it's not at that average number, then a population of a nation or a geographic area will be in decline,
Right.
right? And it's hard to pull out of that. And then I remember more recently, all the homes in the mountains of Italy going up for sale for $1. And the mountain towns in Italy and Sicily are, like, selling these houses for $1, and I'm like, "What's going on with that?" And as I read about it, I know a lot of people that would love to buy an Italian villa for $1, right? And I read
Right.
about it, and it all says, the populations of these towns has reached, like, 2 people, and they
Right.
can't have that, and there are these ghost towns in the mountains in Italy and Sicily because the population just died off and the youth moved away. They moved to the big city. So
Right.
there were a few elderly people left, and then
Right.
there's no one to replace them. And then it hits me that Elon kind of was, you know, a prognostic
Yeah. He was
of
prophetic.
of what was going to have. He was prophetic.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, so Italy's a country like that. Japan is another one. America. So basically,
South Korea is in
yeah,
big trouble with that same birth rate. And the US now is like on the cusp of that going to be a crisis in the future.
yes. Well, look at so a lot of species are they can mate and have litters of their offspring within like a year of birth, and then you look at other species like elephants, they take a longer time to develop and to gestate, and they put more into their offspring. Look at humans, and we're kind of the pinnacle of that. And so essentially, what have we done to that? Well, we've added 4 years of higher education or more. We've added a lot of rites of passage that have nothing to do with human development. I'm not anti-education. In fact, I think more men need to go to college. We've got a massive decline in male college attendance. So I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, you look at the messaging that's been given, you look at the economic stability, you look at how how difficult it is to own a home now for a lot of younger people. And so you have a lot of impediments to um to getting together, mating, and having kids. Like that's the bottom line is that. And culturally, there's a value put on premium put on independence and extending out adolescence and having fun and making your mark and finding who you are. And you don't find who you are, you make who you are. But that's a total that so have a wanderlust period, eat, pray, love, all of that. So it's no wonder. I mean, once virtual reality becomes convincing
Yeah,
enough, like it did in Star Trek
yeah,
with the holodeck,
yeah. Right, right.
God help us. So
I I don't know. I didn't like Eat, Pray, Love so much. I wanted to write a counter book called Starve, Curse, Hate.
that's really freaking funny. Well, I don't like that kind of
And
stuff
it was
either.
so that was a titanic narcissist.
Well, yeah, but it
I
look
mean,
at
just using various people. Um, well, let's start to wrap up.
I
I'm thinking
agree.
about how would we kind of envision the lifespan of romance. It would begin with being single and alone
Uh-huh.
and without child.
Right.
I strongly feel that for males, it's next got to lead to career solid path established, if not actual
Mhm.
career established, or
Sure.
you're going to be in for chaos with everything that
Mm.
follows.
Yes.
Female may be optional. From all the career trajectories you see when babies arrive, for a lot of very uber successful females, it's no choice. They're like, I'm out. I'm gonna raise these children at least for a few years. I'm out.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm gonna be a mother. It's what I wanna do. Not only that, I feel it in my bones. And by the
Right.
way, some of our listeners have commented throughout a lot of Geraldine talking about her personal experience of the dramatic changes of one's body in pregnancy is a sacred event. She says it is a spiritual crisis for a woman to go through pregnancy and then delivery, and it's a new life is harbored
Yeah.
and brought forth, and that is a sacred event, no matter what you believe in religiously or spiritually.
That's true.
Um, I mean that that kind of wraps it up for me from single and alone to dating. That's hard enough to solve that, crack that nut, um, or solve that Gordian knot, finding the right mate for yourself who's likely to last instead of end up in divorce in short order. And then from there, do you
Exactly.
have a child? Do you have children or not? I think at each of these stages, narcissism, or let's say the dark triad or tetrad,
Yes.
is an ultimate obstacle to
100%.
progress in each one of these arenas.
Yeah.
So, my interpretation of this, whether popular or not, kind of breaks through the rationalization that might be going on. It doesn't take mature character, which is the antidote for the dark triad and tetrad, mature, virtuous character, one that
Bingo.
is ethical, but also worldly wise, that's shrewd, yet good and beneficent, well boundaried, theory of mind. It's mindful and it's constructive. It's generative even. The very concept of generativity couldn't be more illustrated better illustrated than metaphorically or like in flesh and blood in the form of a new life. That's the ultimate generativity. And I think it's part of what Geraldine is talking about in her comments to us. Oh, and by the way, Angela says Elon just needs humans on Earth as slaves while he's on Mars. So that's why he must be pro-natalist.
Well, that's a
But,
tricky concern. I'll leave that to
yeah,
the audience.
that's for another time.
Yeah.
But narcissism is a blockade against making this incredibly Sisyphean progress up this mountain from being single and alone to just being able to get a date, just being able to like for the males especially, being able to attract a female with male competition.
Mhm.
And then from there, is it the right person? Are
Yeah.
you well matched? And then from there, maybe you find love together and it's meet cute and it's
Mhm.
sexy, but it's also love. But will you be good partners? You don't know. That has not been tested. Then that gets
No.
tested. You're further up the mountain, climbing it.
Right.
with narcissism and the dark triad impeding your progress all the way. And then you get to the point of, do you have a baby or not? And again, uh, the dark triad rears its ugly head. It's Medusa head, and
Uh-huh.
it's Narcissus head,
Right.
and it's in the way. So I think when people talk about how just do Tinder and have hookups, hookup
Yeah.
culture, that takes no mature, beneficent character development or virtue to just hook up. You could still be in the dark triad and just have
Absolutely.
an endless series of hookups your whole life
100%.
if you can
Yeah.
manage it. So you can be and justify being high in the dark triad and
Right.
live the lifestyle of hookup to actually find love and pair bonding and friendship with one person and exclusively date. You can get away with a lot with your narcissism and kind of have them live in the narcissistic fog and manipulate and confuse another person for a time, but eventually you're going to be found out and you won't rise to the level of a lasting romance that's going to go many years. You can't accomplish it. In fact, if you're a narcissist, you don't want it to last. You want it to end and you want other supply and you want other victims to manipulate. But then if you get to the level of a child, and then here's this study saying that people are high in 2 of the 3 of the dark triad
Yeah.
who are anti-natalist,
Yeah.
to my mind, there it is again. It's the dark triad again saying you're not gonna get to a baby if you have the high traits, if you have these traits. I'm
Well, I
flipping it
mean,
around. Instead of saying anti-natalists happen to have these high 2 of the 3 dark triad traits, I'm saying if you're high in any of the dark triad traits, it's gonna block you from achieving a baby. You're not
yeah.
going to find love with somebody that reaches a bar where one or both of you are going to stay committed to raising a helpless infant, neonate, into their through their formative years.
No, you won't find
Not going to
love.
be able to do it.
I mean, not love.
Or
No.
parenting, like good parenting, or good enough parenting. You won't.
Well,
You're not capable of it if you have those traits.
no, you're not. But I mean, isn't that
See,
what
I'm
we're looking
reversing the
at?
order.
It's the
I
what?
happen to be I'm reversing the order of, "Hey, I'm an activist, anti-natalist.
Uh
Oh,
huh.
oops, I happen to have these high dark triad traits." I'm
Okay.
saying do it in the reverse. If you happen to have high dark triad traits, your progress toward achieving offspring is impaired severely, significantly.
Yes. I mean, so men high in dark triad traits are typically seducers, and so they're very good at getting what they want that way. But the child rearing, like you just said, is very precarious if not non-existent. So
Mhm.
you're onto a lot there. I think. Now, what's interesting is that
Nosferatu.
yeah, absolutely.
Right?
I
I
mean,
mean, it's a
brilliant.
story of a vampire.
So, and I think that's partially why, if you look at that correlation, psychopathy and Machiavellianism were highly correlated with antinatalism. Depression was too, and not narcissism as much. I mean, a narcissist may want an extension of themselves. That might not put as much thought or care into what that life's going to be like for that person. So, in a perverse way, the depressed person who doesn't think it's worth the next generation being born has put more empathy, it's just misguided, into that versus the person who says, well, I don't really care. Like, if everybody else is having kids, I'm going to have them. It's like, oh, okay, well, still not a good reason. I mean, you contribute to the continuation of humanity, but your
Yeah.
empathy is not that great. So, I mean, I'm cynical on the dark triad stuff because people keep having that because it keeps going well with courtship in the initial phases. And if you slip one past the goalie and have a kid with somebody, there you go. So, like,
Huh.
part of this is getting wise with who you date and with what you get attached to. And people might not want to hear that sometimes, but a lot of them do because there's a $1 billion industry on those kind of books.
Well, we talked about that, how the dating industry, dating companies want you to be in a warehouse, but not succeed at finding love. Yeah,
Well,
I
no, you
think.
nailed it. It's so I
Hmm.
think there's natural narcissists, natural psychopaths, natural Machiavellians, which they probably are either narcissists or psychopaths. And then I think there's ones that are pushed along the way to become that when they wouldn't have. And I think that's what the apps do. The apps are absolutely pushing more people. And Rob talked about it. He said what's happening is people on the apps are who are high in dark triad are messing with people, making women upset, who then
Mm.
treat men poorly who don't have dark triad traits, and then those men get
Oh yeah,
cynical.
yeah.
So
It's
everyone
this
gets
cascade. Yeah.
zombified, cascaded, and
Oh
the
yeah.
answer is
Yeah.
God, stop projecting. Stop assuming that the
How
person
about
you're
meet in
talking
person? How about it needs to become popular to meet in person again and
anyone on a date,
to
I will give people
socialize in
yes, I
person.
will give people one free piece of advice I'm gonna make into a TikTok later. If you're talking to someone on a dating app and you say, "Why don't we meet for coffee?" and you say it pretty quickly, and they say, "Well, I don't really do that till I've talked on the app a while." Eh, not good because they wanna sit there and "Nee, nee, nee, nee." That's not what human beings do. It's like, "Oh, safety." No, not safety. You have a phone, you have a
Oh, okay, yeah.
911 remote.
Wow.
Meet at
So I
Starbucks.
like
You're not
that
gonna
as a
die.
I like that as a filter. I mean, you could probably use that at any stage of the romantic lifespan that we're talking about. That
Yes.
if somebody isn't willing to do natural, normal human things like meet in person, then they have all kinds of things you're blocking. They have some ulterior
Yes.
motive. They're there just for attention. They're so shy they wouldn't be capable of really being a genuine, authentic person with you.
Yes.
That's of the quality that's gonna match who you are and what you need.
And they're not gonna
Um,
tell you that.
yeah,
They're
but
not
you
gonna they're not
know
gonna say, "I'm
by them
wasting your
refusing.
time." Keep going,
Yeah, but
sorry.
you know by them refusing. You know by them refusing, or they're not into you, or they saw enough, heard enough, even in your brief interaction that they aren't into you, and maybe
Yeah.
they are a quality person,
Yeah.
with more dates than you, but you need to move on from that regardless.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
there's
like
a lot
that.
of phobic avoidant people, and they're waiting on the right person to make them lose their avoidant attachment style. Well, guess what? That's never going to happen. You have to work on that and choose to lose
Yeah.
it. You have to choose to be an adult. I'm sorry. We've pampered and trained and taken care of avoidant attachment people because they don't blow up and freak out and blow up your phone with 20 texts. Well, guess what? They eat your time up like a vampire. And I'm sorry,
Mm,
but they don't go around fretting the same way people with anxious attachment do, who get kicked and branded with a scarlet letter. Avoidant
yeah,
attachment needs its day of being spotted and told to do better. If someone harasses you on the phone, you can call the cops. If someone goes from person to person to person,
yeah,
wasting massive time, they get to do that. So, guess
yeah,
what? You have to be the one, daters, to say, man, that really is dumb. Like, you can't meet after talking for a day or two. Like, we live on Earth in America where your phone has an emergency immediate call button that calls 911 and you can demand to meet at a Starbucks. There is no reason not to do that unless you are gamey and manipulative. And people get away with that. So I'm annoyed with it. I think it's time to clamp down on that. We got to start stamp out behavior that we don't want to see. You've got to not reward it. And guys, don't go around leaping through those hoops. Don't Women don't do that
yeah,
either. Safety, safety, safety. Nobody at Starbucks. Listen, I'm sorry. You could see in the news tomorrow something happened at Starbucks. I mean, I'm not, but I keep using that example. Meeting in public.
yeah.
meet in public. Like nothing's gonna. What is your? If you are that catastrophic about meeting in public, you need a psychiatrist. You need
Hmm.
someone, and you need to desensitize yourself to going outside because there's nothing. You are going to be okay. I promise. Now, what you don't do is don't do the worst stuff possible of meeting a guy for dinner and going to his home and it not working out because don't do that. Like seriously, and then be like, oh, all men are terrible because I went to this dude's home and I can't believe we did something. Like, okay, keep it at the Starbucks. Like, control your environment
Mm,
and don't assume that because you didn't sometime that everyone's going to be terrible. Like that's a big point for me is everyone's not everyone. Everyone's not going to try to manipulate you. The fact that it happened before, if you
mm.
didn't exactly know what your boundaries were, doesn't mean everyone else is going to do that to you.
Well said. Yeah, that's kind of mic drop there.
I appreciate you.
Um,
Geraldine's been dropping some stuff too here.
yeah, she has.
That's really
I
good.
think I haven't done a in absentia debate here against didn't do a very good job, I think, against Pat Benatar, against David Benatar.
Yeah, sure.
But I do want to say just two things that I believe counter him.
Okay.
Um, One is he's using logic and rationality
Yes.
to argue the morality of pro versus con. Should humans have children? Should there be offspring? And I would counter by saying humans aren't just rationality and logic, and my having a son is completely illogical.
Hmm.
I gave up a fantastic New York apartment that I could own for him because he needed certain things. Um, I gave up certain career aspirations, at least for a time, for 10 years of his existence, until now and more recently. I gave up all kinds of things for him and his mother, just like massive sacrifices that are completely illogical and would
Right.
just ruffle the feathers of a truly Machiavellian person or a psychopath. It's irrational, it's illogical, and yet it's built into us all that instincts are not rational. They're not about logic. They're about survive and reproduce, including your progeny, helping
Yes.
them survive and someday reproduce and live on. And it's irrational because it's instinctual, and
Yeah.
instincts aren't logical. So there's that.
No.
And then the second thing I was telling you is where's the story of being human within that logic? There's no story there. And you could say there's no meaning there. So it's while it's completely irrational and illogical, the things I've given up for my son, I'm glad
Hmm.
I did, even so, and will continue to do so
Yeah.
irrationally. And that's partly what makes it a story for me
Yeah.
and for us and for him. It's a
Well,
story, has meaning. Maybe meaning trumps um, the debate over asymmetry and natalism versus antinatalism. Maybe finding meaning trumps the logic of that debate.
I think I'm very emotivist and I'm vitalist. I really think that much of what people will say is just logic is very driven by emotion as well. Like you find your passions, you find your vitality, and then you kind of like if you love intellectual debate, there's a high to that. There's an emotion to that. So it's hard to escape emotion. It really is. I would say it's almost impossible. So that idea, like meaning matters, and if your a meaning is usually through something with obstacles, and then you achieve it. So I like your point on that. I would say Um,
There's no story without there being obstacles and pain. There is no story. In fact,
Absolutely.
extend it to the entire species. See how the idea propagates to its fullest. What's that called when you do that as a philosophy experiment? Extend the theory
Uh-huh.
to cover ad infinitum as
Okay.
many, like all humans, and then examine it for its um for the good in it,
Oh, are you talking about
right?
basically the categorical imperative by Kant? Like you say, can this be applied to everyone?
Can it be applied to everyone and
Yeah.
extended
Yeah. Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
ad infinitum? What then happens? There's no meaning to the human story. There's no meaning
No.
if
Um,
we shouldn't procreate.
no, I mean, you view it almost as if kind of closing the door on an experiment. It's like, well, what do you think needs to exist then beyond that? I don't.
Well,
I mean,
maybe
and whatever
rocks,
evolves,
geology or something.
yeah.
Maybe
I mean,
rocks.
whatever evolves next will be. Oh yeah.
Well,
I
no,
mean,
it needs. I mean, that it should be extended to all species as well.
right.
There
Well,
should
but
be
there.
no animals. Perhaps
I think.
plants are
Yeah, I
okay.
think it's a sentience thing. Yeah, I mean, lobsters aren't going to stop mating, even though there's a dominance hierarchy there, as we know from Peterson. I mean, it
Well,
doesn't.
maybe antinatalism ought to include lobsters,
Yeah, I
or
mean,
maybe all animals. Are
but they
plants
can't
okay?
consent
Can
to
they
it. Yeah.
reproduce?
Well, and that's interesting is because a lot of them, if they could speak, probably would say that they want to try to reproduce. I don't, there's like this, and this is what you see when
See,
you
that's
give,
the instincts, man.
I know. Yeah.
That's what is being denied, right? If you combine Freudian thought with evolutionary psychologic thought and use the triune brain model and say there's a reptilian, mammalian, and higher brain, the reptilian brain is the same as the instincts,
Yeah.
which are by definition unconscious.
Sure.
What makes
Right.
them instincts in part is they operate without us consciously having to steer them.
Yes.
They are
Right.
unconscious.
But it's like when we start thinking about breathing. I mean, it's when people start asking a lot of questions in the what if stuff. I mean, I get it. I'm not anti-natalist. I think because I don't. Is it a net good for humanity to continue? I would say yes. So that's my answer. I mean, that's as much as I think about it. You can think about thinking about everything, and that's where it's come with dating. Is it's
Yeah, it's too
talking about
much thinking. It's
like
too much.
take a
Yeah,
damn
back to
break.
scrupulousness.
It is.
It's too much thinking. I think what
God.
I arrive at is
Yeah.
I'm definitely not anti-natalist. Absolutely not for
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
or the entire species. But I'm not pro-natalist either. I almost think I, I don't want to talk about it because it's kind of a contrived argument.
Okay.
We are here as a species, and our prime directive is humanity is good and it ought to go on. I would want
Right.
it to go on. I want to go on. I want you to go on. And I don't get any other perspective except that. Doesn't make sense, either logically, nor in meaning, nor
Yeah.
emotionally, nor instinctually.
Right. Agreed.
Every every part of us wants to go on,
Yep. I
whether
agree.
you're willing to admit it or not.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Well,
yeah.
this is
Anyway,
great. I know
yeah.
I keep riffing and you keep riffing, and if you when you
I
want to
know, I
sign it
know.
off, I can bring the ripping to a total
Please, yeah,
stop.
please get scrupulous about the riffing. Stop
Ah,
the riff. Yeah,
that's funny.
stop the
Yeah.
scrupulous the riffing.
Oh
All
man.
right.
Yeah. This is fun.
Thank you guys for having joined, Geraldine, Michael, Angela, especially all you guys.
Oh yeah. Thanks
And
everyone. This is amazing.
yeah, we'll kind of put this together. It'll be a long one for those that didn't get to be here live.
I even
All
wonder
right.
if it could be a good two-parter or something. If there's a way to, I mean, whatever you want to do with it's great, but we've got a lot
What?
here.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, we didn't really. completely cover the romantic lifespan, if you
Exactly.
will. Lots of
No,
hearts
it could
coming
be
out.
3 part. It could be this gets divided into 2 parts, and then I mean, I don't know, just to make it shorter, whatever you wanna do.
I'm telling you that, I keep, like, harping on the new narcissism in society, and it's so
Yeah,
interesting to me, and it's new to me, having studied just narcissism in the individual.
yeah,
And I wonder if this mock the interest in mocks, what is your mock score? How Machiavellian are you? Even that didn't even exist like 10, 20 years ago. Nobody looked into that. Or psychopathy in the general public. We didn't look into that. That was like Jeffrey Dahmer and Charles Manson, and that's it. Like, so incredibly rare that we didn't even study that or look at it. But now we are. And now
yeah,
there's narcissistic abuse as a whole field of study. I mean, I wonder if we've become a giant high school,
yeah, I
worldwide
think
high
so.
school, primitive.
Very good
Yeah.
observation. I love it.
All right.
Alright, this is
More to
amazing.
come.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank
Psych
you.
Fox and Guy Psych, Guy
That's right.
Psychology
That's
at
right.
Twitter. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm
At
excited.
X.
That's right.
Thanks.
X. See ya.
Talk to you soon.